disaster, but we know this won't last forever. We will sing and we will be outside. We will hold hands, we will laugh and we will cry. But for now, we know the beauty of a window, how we see the leaves rustle when the wind blows. We are warm, we are safe inside. So just hold on, everything will be alright. Everything's gonna be alright. Everything's gonna be just fine. Raise your head and close your eyes. Take your worries to the sky. Everything's gonna be alright. Everything's gonna be just fine. Raise your head and close your eyes. Take your worries to the sky. Hope lives inside us. Let it shine through the darkness.
Faith is the way holding us together. It resides within our broken souls. So let's break these chains of fear. It's only a battle that goes on up in the air. Tear away from death and destruction. We'll find a way right out of here.
Everything's gonna be alright. Everything's gonna be just fine. Raise your hand and close your eyes. Take your worries to the sky. Everything's gonna be alright. Everything's gonna be just fine. Raise your hand and close your eyes. Take your worries to the sky. Let us rewrite the chapter. See the beauty and enjoy the laughter. Let us see the light despite being surrounded by the darkness and our fears chasing us.
Onca kilometros imonas a orar, imonas marges passar olhar. So just stay strong and let the sun shine bright. Just remember everything will be alright.
Everything's gonna be alright. Everything's gonna be just fine. Raise your head and close your eyes. Take your worries to the sky. Everything's gonna be alright. Everything's gonna be just fine. Raise your head and close your eyes. Take your worries to the sky.
लब पे आती है दुआ बन के तमन्ना मेरी। लब पे आती है दुआ बन के तमन्ना मेरी। जिंदगी शम्मा की सूरत हो खुदाया मेरी। जिंदगी शम्मा की सूरत हो खुदाया मेरी। लब पे आती है दुआ बन के तमन्ना मेरी। से यूं ही मेरे वतन की जिस तरह फूल से होती है चमन की जीनत, जिस तरह फूल से होती है चमन की जीनत, जिंदगी हो मेरी परवाने की सूरत या रब, जिंदगी हो मेरी परवाने की सूरत या रब, इल्म की शम्मा से हो मुझको मोहब्बत या रब, इल्म की शम्मा से हो मुझको मोहब्बत या
From a moment to a memory, out of darkness, creating energy. Every action builds your legacy. One heartbeat to a symphony. Harmony and diversity. Spiritual awakening. Sense of belonging. Forever believing. In your smile beyond us, in your words guidance, in your heart devotion, in your deeds direction. In your smile beyond us, in your words guidance. लम्हे से ये गया तक, तारीकी से रोशनी तक, अमल से ही मेरा से सांसों पे धड़कता है दिल. Harmony and diversity. Spiritual awakening. तालों का एहसास है, हमेशा यकीन है. In your smile beyond us, in your words guidance, in your heart devotion, in your deeds direction. In your smile beyond us, in your words guidance.
You taught me love, you taught me kindness, kindness, the kind that brings us light from darkness, darkness, made us a family, nothing else I'd rather be, gave me a home, gave me a start, learned to heal with my heart. There are days where I wonder if there was no one to do what you do, who would hold up the corners of a smile and better a life. Imagine what could change if we all do the same.
We can show our love. We can ignite a spark. We stand stronger as one. Together we can heal a heart. A smile is all it takes.
are days where I wonder if there was no one to do what you do. Who would hold up the corners of a smile and better our life? Imagine what could change if we all do the same.
We can show our love. We can ignite a spark. We stand stronger as one. Together we can heal the heart. Heal the heart. Ignite a spark. Stand as one. I love, show our love,
یا علی مدد، بیانونو و خوش آمدید. از شما متشکریم که باز هم با بازتاب‌های جمعه شب دیگری با من همراه هستید. نام من ملکه کریم راجن است و افتخار میکنم که میزبان شما اعضای جماعت و خانواده های شما با اعتقادات چندباوری و همه کسانی هستیم که از سراسر جهان ما را میبینند. من یک باری دیگر از وینیپگ منیتوبا با شما وصل هستم و از آنجا که ظاهراً من هفته گذشته با مشغله های خوشحالی تماس خوبی نداشتم، باز هم تیم مرا دعوت کرد. بنابراین از همه شما بسیار سپاسگزارم. می دانید که این یک هفته بسیار مصروف کننده با تمام جشن‌های خوشحالی و آن هم به صورت مجازی و روی صفحات شیشه‌ای بوده است. و همین حالا در همین زمان سال گذشته همانطور که گفتیم ما با هم داندیا و رسره را به شکل یک مهمانی موسیقی داشتیم، ولی امسال این امکان پذیر نیست. اما ما بسیار خوششانس هستیم که می توانیم به طور واقعی باز هم با هم یک جا باشیم. اما امروز من شربت درست نکردم، اما بعد از برنامه جمعه گذشته شوهرم این را به خانه آورد. بنابراین ظاهراً ما در برخی از مواقع شربت‌های انگلیسی را خواهیم داشت. و اما صحبت از شوهرم، او آشپز کامل است و برای اولین بار برای ما بریانی مرغ درست کرد تا احساس دلتنگی نکنیم. کارش واقعاً فوق‌العاده خوب بود. دستپختش درست مثل دستپخت مادرم بود. اما آیا می توانید تصور کنید که این تعریف را به او بکنید؟ با او در این مورد چیزی نگویید که یک کمی سرش بزرگ می شود. اما امیدوارم همه شما فرصت برای خوردن غذای جشن را داشته باشید. خواه این غذاها بریانی، شربت، منتو و یا جلبی باشد. همه آنها بسیار خوب هستند و اگر می خواهید که این خوشحالی را به خوبی تجربه کنید، چیز جدیدی را امتحان کنید. اکنون هنگامی که ما با موفقیت ها اشاره می کنیم، در هفته گذشته اولین واکسین های کووید 19 را که به بیماران در کانادا و ایالات متحده داده شده است ناظر بودیم. چه لحظه از امید و احساس نور در پایان یک تونل تاریک سال 2020 با انتظار برای رسیدن به تکمیل واکسین برای سال 2021 در سطح جهان. امیدوارم که یک بار دیگر بتوانیم به حالت عادی برگردیم. ما می‌دانیم که بسیاری از شما سوالات دارید و ممکن برای بسیاری مسائل رسانه ها یک کمی گیج کننده باشد. بنابراین امشب ما فکر کردیم که برخی از متخصصان بهداشت خود را برای پاسخگویی به سوالات شما دور هم بیاوریم تا اینها برای ما تجزیه و تحلیل کنند. از همه کسانی که وقت خود را برای ارسال سوال صرف کردند متشکریم و اعضای محترم پنل ما سعی خواهند کرد تا حد امکان به ناگفته های شما در این موارد پاسخ ارائه دهند. اما قبل از این که ما به آن بپردازیم، یک بار دیگر این افتخار را داریم که در این هفته باز هم قنصل ملی امیر علی قاسم لکا را با خود داریم که از منزل خود از تورنتو با ما وصل هستند. پرزیدنت صاحب، شما روی خط هستید.
My dear brothers and sisters, یا علی مدد.
برادران و خواهران عزیز من، یا علی مدد. در حالی که به پایان سال 2020 نزدیک می شویم، دوست دارم لحظه‌ای با شما در مورد چند رویداد امسال صحبت کنم. آنها مربوط به قدرتمندی و توان انجمن ماست و این که چگونه اعضای جامعه ما برای برآورده ساختن خواسته های دوره‌ای که ما در آن هستیم پرتوان شدند. من می‌خواهم به شما از کار خارق‌العاده داوطلبان ما که در پشت صحنه فعالیت داشتند توصیف کنم که برخی از آنها در این دوران بیماری همگیر تبدیل به قهرمانان نامرئی شدند. آنها کسانی هستند که حاضر امام محبوب من در پیام هفته گذشته خود به جماعت به آنان ادای احترام نمود. و من می‌خواهم با شما در مورد این که چگونه این قهرمانان کار خود را انجام دادند صحبت کنم. در ماه جنوری همین سال ما شروع به شنیدن گزارش‌های مربوط به کووید 19 کردیم. در آن زمان سخت بود تصور کرد که شرایط به گونه‌ای که امروز هستند تکامل پیدا کنند. در جنوری ما در مورد این بیماری خیلی کم می‌فهمیدیم و مطمئن نبودیم که این بیماری در کانادا چه تأثیری خواهد داشت. اما از خودمان می‌پرسیدیم که اثرات این بیماری چه خطری برای جماعت دارد و چگونه می‌توانیم از جماعت محافظت کنیم. ما چه اقدامات را باید انجام دهیم تا امنیت هر عضو جماعت خود را در کانادا در صورت تبدیل شدن کووید 19 به یک مسئله تضمین کنیم. بنابراین ما یک نیروی کاری کووید 19 که چندین وظیفه را به پیش ببرد تأسیس کردیم که وظیفه اصلی آن حفاظت از سلامتی و ایمنی جامعه ما بود. این گروه است که از ماه جنوری بدین سو برای حفظ امنیت جماعت برنامه ریزی کرده و نگرانی سلامت آنان بوده است. آنها تبدیل به تیمی شدند که پروتکل های ایمنی و صحی ما را اجرا کردند. بازگشایی جماعتخانه، سیستم ثبت نام و تخصص ظرفیت جای برای حفظ امنیت همه جماعت را برنامه ریزی و مدیریت کردند. این افراد داوطلبی هستند که سیستم های نظارتی و دیدبانی را برای هدایت کوچکترین تغییر در شرایط بیماری همگیر ایجاد کردند تا بتوانیم به راحتی و با خیال آسوده مشارکت داشته باشیم. در ماه مارچ ما گام بی سابقه برای بستن جماعتخانه ها برداشتیم. همان طوری که به یاد دارید این درست قبل از نوروز بود، زمانی که انجمن ما معمولاً برای جشن سال نو گرده هم می آیند. ما از خود پرسیدیم در حالی که هیچ فضای فیزیکی مشترکی وجود ندارد چگونه اعضای جماعت را متحد و نزدیک به یکدیگر نگه داریم؟ چگونه سالمندان ما احساس راحتی کنند و از تنهایی رنج نبرند؟ چگونه فرزندان ما توانایی جامعه ما را تجربه خواهند کرد و در بی ارتباطی قرار نخواهند گرفت. اینجا بود که رضاکاران ما در برابر این چالش به پا خواستند. در عرض یک هفته پس از بسته شدن جماعتخانه، تیم ارتباطات ما افکار و خلاقیت‌های خیش را با هم شریک ساختند تا یک راهی را جستجو کنند که جامعه ما تا حد امکان با هم ارتباط داشته باشند. آنها بزرگترین استعدادهای ما را در زمینه روزنامه‌نگاری، تولید، هنر و فرهنگ و بسیاری زمینه‌های دیگر بسیج کردند تا تأمل یا بازتاب جمع شبها، صدا و نظریات اهل خبره و سایر برنامه را ایجاد کنند. رهبری برجسته آنها جماعت ما را آگاهی داد، انگیزه بخشید و با هم در پیوند نگه داشت. خیلی با سرعت داوطلبان بوردها و مقامات انتصابی دیگر شیوه کاری همیشگی خیش را تغییر دادند و روی برنامه‌های دیجیتال تمرکز کردند، به شمول برنامه‌های بیت العلم. تحت رهبری تیم IVC، داوطلبان ما طی چند روز برای حمایت از جماعت در امور اقتصادی، صحی، آموزشی و رفاه اجتماعی آموزش دیدند، کاری که قبل از آن IVC انجام نداده بود. ما اغلب کار داوطلبان خود را با داشتن دلایل خوب به رسمیت می شناسیم. من این کار را امروز انجام می دهم، زیرا تلاش‌های آنها در طول سالی که گذشت استثنایی بوده است. شب و روز داوطلبان ما به فکر رفاه جماعت بودند و در این راستا تلاش سخت نمودند. در بسا موارد آنها بهترین کارشناسان کشور را برای ارائه مشاوره خوب به جماعت بسیج کردند. این داوطلبان به طور مداوم مشغول هستند و دائما نگران جماعت هستند. آنها متوجه این هستند که مطمئن شوند از ما مراقبت و محافظت می شود. در حالی که این موضوع ممکن است برای شما ناشناخته باشد. آنها ممکن است هیچ پاداش دریافت نکنند، اما شما می دانید و آنها می دانند که چقدر در حمایت از جماعت موفق بودند. به عنوان یک جماعت می توان به کار این افراد ادای احترام کرد. با این حال مهمترین پاداش و تنها چیزی که در نهایت اهمیت دارد شناخت است که از طرف امام عزیز ما آمده است. این داوطلبان که در پیام هفته گذشته امام به رسمیت شناخته شدند، زمانی که ایشان فرمودند قرن هاست که خدمت داوطلبانه از پشتوانه کلیدی سنت ما بوده است. بیماری همگیر جهانی داوطلبان و رضاکاران ما را به شیوه‌های جدید بسیاری به چالش کشیده است، چه در ارائه مراقبت و آسایش برای جماعت و دیگران، نشر اطلاعات بهداشتی و صحی مهم و به موقع و یا تولید محتواهای ارتباطی دیجیتال برای آگاه نگه داشتن و انگیزه بخشیدن به جماعت. من از کار عالی داوطلبانم در سراسر جهان برای پشتیبانی از جماعت و جوامعی که در میان آنها زندگی می کند بسیار خرسندم و ستایش فراوان و بهترین دعاهای خیر پرمهر و محبت آمیز خود را به همه داوطلبانم ابلاغ می کنم. چند نظر دیگر وجود دارد که می خواهم در مورد پیام هفته گذشته مولانا حاضر امام با شما در میان بگذارم. نخست راهنمود مولانا حاضر امام در مورد چگونگی رو در رو شدن با ناملایمات است که ایشان شرح دادند. جماعت با آن بیگانه نیست. ما در بسیاری از موارد در تاریخ 1400 ساله خود با ناملایمات مواجه شده ایم. مولانا حاضر امام به روشنی بیان کرد که ما چگونه باید پاسخ دهیم و در نهایت بر چنین شرایط غلبه کنیم. او 30 ویژگی که عبارتند از وحدت، تصمیم و انعطاف پذیری اینها را برجسته کرد. به خاطر داشته باشید که آنها مهم هستند: وحدت، تصمیم و انعطاف پذیری. و امام به ما یادآوری کرد که این روی کرد در مطابقت با سنت تاریخی ماست. وحدت در این زمینه شیوه است که در آن انعطاف پذیری خود را توسعه می دهیم. وحدت اشاره به این دارد که چگونه ما به عنوان یک جامعه گرد هم می آییم و در راستای کار داوطلبانه استثنایی که من شرح دادم از یکدیگر حمایت می کنیم. همچنین اشاره به پیوندهایی است که ما با دوستان و خانواده ایمان به اشتراک می‌گذاریم. این پیوندها با ارزش هستند، یک موهبت هستند و باید گرامی داشت شوند. گاهی اوقات این امر ممکن است دشوار باشد، به خصوص در جو فعلی، اما وظیفه ما این است که با مهربانی و دلسوزی زندگی کنیم، با هم ملایم بوده و بخشنده یکدیگر باشیم و در هر عمل و تعامل خود عشق و محبت نشان دهیم. در زمان بحران است که ما درک می‌کنیم که وحدت خانوادگی چقدر مهم است تا عزم و انعطاف پذیری خود را حفظ کنیم. وحدت خانوادگی یک ارزش گرانبهاست. برای حصول آن باید سخت کار کنیم و آن را گرامی بداریم. مولانا حاضر امام ما را یک نیروی حیاتی دیگر نیز در مواجهه با ملایمات هدایت کرد. راحتی و حمایتی که از انجام عادات و ممارست‌های ایمانی ناشی می شود، چه در جماعتخانه‌ها و چه از طریق دعای شخصی و خصوصی. او به ما می گوید که به ایمانمان تکیه کنیم، زیرا انجام کار ما را از گزند هر چالشی که با آن روبرو هستیم سربلند بیرون می کند. بعداً مولانا حاضر امام خاطر نشان کردند که اولویت وی در این بیماری همگیر تضمین امداد رسانی و حمایت از کسانی است که آسیب پذیرتر هستند. رضاکاران ما این هدایت را در یک سال گذشته به صورت استثنایی انجام دادند. مولانا حاضر امام سپس از آینده ما سخن گفت و ابراز امیدواری کرد که جماعت ما از بحران کنونی با قدرت و ظرفیت‌های بیشتری به پا خواهد خاست. این پیام است که او بارها و بارها در دوران بیماری همگیر منتقل کرده است و هفته گذشته بار دیگر بر آن تأکید کرد. با این حال ظهور با قدرت تنها به صورت ذاتی اتفاق نمی افتد، بلکه در نتیجه تابعیت از وحدت و انعطاف پذیری پیدا می شود که قبلا ذکر شد. همچنین محصول تلاش فردی ما و سعی برای قرار دادن هوشمندانه خود در زمینه‌هایی که فایده‌مند برای آینده ما و آینده کسانی که به ما وابسته هستند. برادران و خواهران عزیز من می‌دانم که بسیاری از ما در سراسر کانادا در انزوا به سر می‌بریم و تأثیر بسته شدن دوباره ادارات، تأسیسات، مکاتب و فروشگاه‌ها در رابطه با موج جدید کووید 19 برای همه خیلی سنگین است. از شما می‌خواهم که این گفته را به خاطر بسپارید. هرگز شب را باور نکردم، زیرا در فراسوی دهلیزش به امید دریچه دل بسته بودم. انشاءالله ما آینده روشن در افق داریم. پیشرفت‌های اخیر مربوط به واکسین کووید 19 از جمله تایید و توزیع آن مثبت و امیدوار کننده است. اگر ما این مسائل را در ذهن داشته باشیم، اصول خدمت داوطلبانه، وحدت و انعطاف پذیری و در هنگام سختی‌ها به ایمان و عبادات تکیه کردن، انشاءالله خود را در طرف دیگر وقتی از این مرحله می‌گذریم قوی تر از قبل خواهیم یافت. با تشکر از شما و خدا حافظ.
پرزیدنت صاحب، متشکریم که افکار خود را با ما شریک کردید و اینکه با ما یادآوری کردید که پاسخ جماعت در حمایت از یکدیگر طی سال گذشته چقدر باور نکردنی بوده است. و اکنون من خوشحالم که می توانم موضوع امروز خود را شروع کنم. گروه متخصصان پزشکی که ما امشب با خود داریم شامل دکتر عرفان دالا که ایشان یک دکتر در شفاخانه سنت مایکل و معاون رئیس اتحادیه صحت تورنتو و همچنین اسوسییت پروفسور در دانشگاه تورنتو است و در تعداد از کمیته های ایالتی و فدرال مربوط به بیماری همگیر کووید 19 حضور دارد. تحقیقات وی در این مورد با چندین جایزه ملی همراه بوده است. و همچنین دکتر تسلیم نمجی، دکتر بخش عاجل در شفاخانه همبر ریور و مسئول پاسخ عاجل برای کووید 19 این شفاخانه را در کنار خود داریم. و همچنین در تعداد از کمیته های ایالتی و فدرال مربوط به پاسخ همگیر کووید 19 خدمت می کند. مجله تورنتو لایف دکتر نیمجی را با عنوان یکی از تأثیرگذارترین تورنتوهای 20 نفر معرفی کرده است. و همچنین ما دکتر شاینور اسماعیل، دکتر معالج در کلینیک صحی مترو سیتی در شهر ادمنتون را داریم و یک متخصص کالج سلطنتی در صحت عامه و وقایه و معاون سابق ریاست دکتران برای البرتا است. دکتر اسماعیل در حال حاضر متخصص ارشد پزشکی در مرکز ایمنسازی و بیماری‌های عفونی تنفسی کانادا است و ماه گذشته به دلیل فعالیت‌ها در زمینه ادغام برنامه‌های واکسین در مجله انجمن دکتران کانادا معرفی شد. همچنین کارش در سطح بین المللی نیز شناخته شده است.
All right, it's such a privilege to have you all here on our panel, and we're going to start right away. We have a lot of questions from the Jamaat. So the first question that we got was from Al Riaz from Port Moody. He was saying that we keep hearing how the new vaccine testing has been equivalent to the development of other vaccines because the various stages were completed together rather than by themselves at different times, linearly, as he put it. So how are we supposed to know that there is not going to be any long-term side effects for this vaccine?
That's a great question, Malika, and Al-Riaz is absolutely right. The process for developing a vaccine is very long and it's very costly. And in this situation, because of the pandemic, there's been an urgent need for a vaccine. And so there's been significant collaboration and investment worldwide to develop that vaccine. So there's basically 3 stages of development for a vaccine. The first is exploratory, that takes place in a research lab. Next, you have the preclinical stage where testing is done in animals. And then finally, you have the clinical stage where the testing is done in humans. Now, in the case of the COVID-19 vaccine, the genetic code of the coronavirus was published on January 11th. And that really expedited the exploratory phase and allowed scientists to start working on developing a vaccine. Now, once you get to the clinical stage in humans, you have 3 more phases of testing. And with each phase, you're increasing the number of human volunteers in the trials. So by the time you get to the 3rd phase, you're looking at testing in about 10 to 30,000 human beings to make sure that the vaccine is safe, that it's immunogenic, and that it's efficacious. That means it protects people against the disease. And so the Pfizer trial, which is the vaccine that was recently approved for use on December 9th, actually had a clinical trial of 44,000 human participants across a number of different countries from diverse ethnic backgrounds, diverse ages, as well as different comorbidities. Now, if at any stage of vaccine development there's a concern, then the trial stops and the vaccine doesn't go any further. Once it gets to phase 3, Health Canada is the regulatory body that approves the vaccine, and it looks very closely at the data, and it approves it only if it's proven to be safe and effective. Now, after the approval process, there's ongoing clinical trials that's called phase 4 clinical trials. And there's also surveillance of potential adverse events that's ongoing. And with this particular vaccine, it's scrutinized worldwide, so any particular safety signal will be picked up right away and investigated. And there's one more very important step, and that involves an independent scientific review by an expert committee. And in Canada, that committee is called NACI. It's the National Advisory Committee on Immunization. Now, the World Health Organization recommends that every country have a NITAG like NACI, and that group looks at the safety, efficacy, and immunogenicity of a vaccine, but it also looks at the disease, and it looks at the epidemiology and who the risk groups might be. It also incorporates things like ethics, equity, feasibility, and acceptability into a vaccine program. And so just to give you an idea of how things are moving so quickly, the committee, NACI, usually meets 3 times a year. And in the last week, we've met 3 times. So, and this has been ongoing for a number of months where the evidence is being reviewed in collaboration with Health Canada to ensure that Canadians have access to a safe and efficacious vaccine.
Wow. Okay. Great response. I think you covered a lot of the areas where people were maybe questioning or wondering how this vaccine got approved so quickly when other vaccines take a little bit more time, and the safety around it. So thank you so much. Our second question is along the lines of the understanding about the vaccine and what it consists of. So one of our questions came in from Sophia in Unionville, and Sophia said her understanding is that the vaccine consists of mRNA. The mRNA, however, does not enter the nucleus of the cell. Could you please, one of you, explain to us how the vaccine works and in general how vaccines work?
So when I think about vaccines, I think about studying for an exam. You know, when you want to do well in a test, you do the practice questions so that when the real test comes, you're very prepared. So a vaccine is like a practice test where it gives your immune system a peek into the question, which is the foreign virus, and then your body prepares itself for the answer, which is in the form of antibodies. So that when you are presented with the real test, the infection, your immune system says, hey, I remember you. And then it uses its immune memory to release the store of antibodies and attack the virus. And so when you're thinking about how the COVID-19 vaccines work, you kind of have to understand what the coronavirus looks like. And, you know, many of us have seen cartoon depictions of a coronavirus, and even my son drew a picture of coronavirus on my birthday card. So I guess you could say he gave me coronavirus. But what you can see is that the red projections are the spike protein. And the spike protein is really important because it's like the key that the coronavirus can use to enter into our body's cells and create all sorts of chaos, kind of like an unwelcome guest. And if you can figure out how to develop that key and get rid of that key, you can get rid of the virus. So in terms of how the mRNA vaccines work, they've been researched for decades, for 30 years at least, but they're pretty finicky. And that's why they need a fat or lipid nanoparticle to sort of stabilize them. And that's why you've also heard that, you know, these Pfizer vaccines need to be put in ultra low temperatures, and there's freezers that needs to transport them and store them. So that the mRNA is kind of like a recipe to make that spike protein. And it teaches the cells the recipe, and then it disappears within days, kind of like a Snapchat message. It's here, and then it's gone once it's done its work. So it doesn't enter the nucleus of the cell, and so there's no harm to the DNA or to our genetic code. It just helps your body make the practice test questions so that we can pass the real test. And it doesn't contain the coronavirus, and so you can't get sick with the COVID.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you. Our next question is around the availability and eligibility of the vaccine. So really about the rollout here in Canada. As we've been hearing this week, healthcare workers across Canada are going to be getting the first couple of doses of that Pfizer vaccine that you had mentioned that needs to be kept at ultra low temperatures to keep its stability, as you explained. Now, for anybody else, the other doctors around here on our panel, you know, how's the rollout going to work for the rest of the Jamaat? If you're not a healthcare worker, where do you rank? When will you be getting your vaccine?
You know, that's a great question. The good news at the outset is that there will be more than enough vaccine for every Canadian. It will take time. It'll probably be somewhere around 9 months probably before everybody who wants a vaccine, and I hope everybody does want a vaccine, has the opportunity to get vaccinated. We're going to start with the people who are most likely to suffer harm from a COVID infection, so people living in long-term care homes, people who are older, and the people who work in long-term care homes and with older patients. And then as time goes on, week after week or month after month, the eligibility criteria will expand. So fairly soon, we should start seeing clinics accepting patients who are not living in long-term care homes, but who are in their, let's say their 70s and then their 60s, And then hopefully by late spring or maybe early summer, we'll have enough vaccine that the general population can be vaccinated. And just as is the case with most vaccines, the vaccines will be available in a variety of healthcare settings. So I think there was some question about whether people would be able to get the vaccine in Jamaat Khana. That's not likely at the outset, or it won't happen at the outset. Looking forward into the summer, it's hard to predict exactly where the vaccine will be available, but probably by summer, it'll be possible to get the vaccine or one of the vaccines, as Dr. Ismail pointed out, in a number of settings. I think with everybody's interest in the vaccine, it's very likely that we will be hearing about how to get a vaccine, where to get a vaccine, what the registration process will be like through pretty much every communications medium there is. And so, I don't think people need to worry very much that they will miss their turn. There will be enough vaccine for everybody. And when it's your turn, you will hear about it.
Now, the next question is about reactions to the vaccine. We were hearing around the world when the vaccine first touched down in the UK that there was a couple of allergic reactions to the vaccine potentially. So I'd like to touch on this point here. Sucker says that when she got the flu shot, she had reacted with some hives. And so she was asking if she should get the COVID-19 vaccine whenever it's available for her.
So when we think about adverse reactions or specifically allergic reactions in the context of this question, we think about first sort of severe allergic reactions and then more minor allergic reactions. And I think what's important with this question asking about hives, it's the constellation of symptoms, certainly. And what we've heard about when we talked about the example of what happened in UK, and I think there was another case in Alaska this week of a severe allergic reaction, or what we would call anaphylaxis. This is life-threatening allergy. We've heard of very few cases of this. And so people that have known allergy to any of the components of the vaccine would, of course, be advised not to take it. And again, these are very rare reactions. And the allergies that we're talking about are to components like PEG or polyethylene glycol. So again, not a common allergy. But of course, if you have a history of an allergic reaction to that, then you would not be advised to get the vaccine. But other than that, if you've had allergic reactions in the past to the vaccine, I think the best advice that we can give you would be that for anybody that's at a point where you're being offered the vaccine, you'll go through a screening process where you'll be asked a series of questions to determine whether or not the vaccine is appropriate for you. And part of that is understanding what the allergic reaction is that you've had in the past to then determine if it's safe for you to have the COVID-19 vaccine.
Okay. Along the same lines, one of our Jamaati members had said that she has acute asthma. And so would this vaccine be okay to take if you are suffering from something like that?
Yes. So the vaccine is safe for people with asthma. It's safe for people with any lung disease. It's safe for people who have problems with their immune system. And one way to think about it is, what you're trying to prevent is this disease, COVID-19, and it's a very serious disease. And so even though no vaccine is 100% safe, it is much safer, much lower risk, orders of magnitude lower risk than getting the disease, particularly for somebody who has a lung disease like asthma or chronic obstructive lung disease, or somebody who is older. And so, in fact, those are the kinds of people that we really, really want to encourage to get a vaccine as soon as they're eligible to have the vaccine.
Awesome. Following on that, another Jamaati member asked if they're taking immunosuppressants, are they able to get the vaccine, or should they be worried about taking it? Should they talk to their healthcare professional?
So that's a really good question, Malika. And the National Advisory Committee on Immunization, which is a committee of independent experts that provide advice to the Public Health Agency of Canada, just released the recommendations for who should get vaccinated just last week. And it's based on a review of the evidence and on the clinical trials, which tested individuals 16 years of age and older. And so NACI looked at who the vaccine was tested in, as well as who was excluded from the clinical trials in order to make their recommendations. And so there were populations that were excluded from the clinical trials or who were present in very small numbers. And so we're uncertain about how the vaccine works in these populations. So one of those populations that was excluded were anyone who was immunosuppressed, either because of underlying disease or because of treatment. For example, cancer patients who are undergoing chemotherapy. Another population that was excluded from the trials were pregnant or breastfeeding women. Another population excluded from the trials were adolescents or children under the age of 16. Now, individuals with autoimmune conditions like lupus were included in the clinical trials, but in very small numbers. And when you think about autoimmune conditions, they're very broad. And so and the spectrum of autoimmune conditions included in the clinical trials was very narrow. And so there's no reason to expect any issues within these populations. It's likely safe and efficacious in these populations, but we're taking a very cautious approach until we get more evidence, especially in the context of a limited supply of vaccine. So really, we need to weigh the risks of severe disease versus the theoretical risk of the vaccine when deciding whether to take it. So individuals who have an underlying condition that puts them at higher risk of COVID-19, of severe disease from COVID-19, like individuals with diabetes or obesity, may be able to get the vaccine in discussion with their healthcare provider. And again, the evidence is evolving very quickly, and the experts are monitoring this evidence, and the recommendations may change. So essentially, anyone 16 years of age and older can get the vaccine. Individuals in groups who have been excluded from the trials or were included in very limited numbers, like people who are immunosuppressed, pregnant and breastfeeding women, people with autoimmune conditions, and also adolescents 12 to 15 years of age and older who were included in limited numbers in the trials, may get the vaccine if they feel that the risk of severe disease from COVID-19 is higher than any theoretical risk of the vaccine.
Okay, so just to follow up on that, Dr. Ismail, we did have a question from someone saying, if they were an expectant mother or if they were breastfeeding currently, would it be okay and safe for them to get the vaccine? You touched on that, saying about the trials and the small specific group of people that have been included, and that did include expectant mothers. Just wanted to touch on that, if you felt that if there was no other underlying conditions for expectant mother or a mother that was breastfeeding, would it be safe to get this vaccine?
So in the clinical trials, there were actually women who became pregnant during the clinical trial. So with the Pfizer trial, about 23 women ended up becoming pregnant and getting the vaccine during the trial. In the Moderna trial, which is another mRNA vaccine that we're looking at, there were about 12 women who became pregnant during the trial and were vaccinated. And all of these women are being followed. There has been no evidence of any adverse outcomes in those individuals or any concerns about safety. Right now, we don't have all of the evidence to be able to make a firm recommendation. And like I said, the evidence is evolving very quickly. These individuals will be monitored very carefully, and the recommendations may change depending on what we find.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you. Just a question from one of our Jamaati members. They say that they live alone, but their parents are elderly. So their parents will probably get the vaccine before they get the vaccine, before they're eligible. Their question was, would it be okay to see their parents then, if their parents have gotten the 2 doses of the vaccine? At what point could they interact with their parents feeling safe if they hadn't got the vaccine yet?
That's a really good question. We know that the vast majority of people who have received the Pfizer vaccine and the Moderna vaccine appear to have protection against severe disease. But we also haven't followed, we don't have, months and months of data yet, or we don't know how long that protection will last. As we learn more, it's almost certain over the coming months that the recommendations will change. And so I think the advice I would give to the person who asked that question is to follow the guidance that people like Dr. Ismail and the other public health physicians in the country are providing. And so as hard as it is to hear this, the guidance for the person who asked that question would still be to take precautions when they go to visit their parents or to stay out of their parents' household when there is disease transmission in the community.
Okay, perfect. Thanks, Dr. Dhalla. I want to follow up just quickly on that one. We did have someone ask, and you touched on this, that maybe you don't know, but how long will someone have immunity to COVID-19 after getting a vaccination?
Yeah, I don't think we know quite yet how long people will have immunity. Both of the vaccines that we've talked about the most so far, the Pfizer vaccine and the Moderna vaccine, there are actually two injections, and so it's important for people to know that they should get both of the injections. And the second injection is sort of thought of as a booster, so that the immunity is longer. Most vaccines that we have put into widespread use do confer fairly long-lasting immunity. So I think most people who know about vaccines, and I'm not a vaccine expert, but most people who are reasonably optimistic that we will have long-lasting immunity from these vaccines, but we don't have the evidence to say that with confidence yet. And so we will have to wait until the data are in before we can say conclusively that people do have immunity for many, many months or years at a time.
Wow, these questions are really good from the Jamaat. I feel like all our doctors on our panel can agree with that. Keeping you on your toes, which is great. And, it's okay if we don't have the answers. I think that's great that you said to keep in touch with the public health experts, because that's what we've seen a lot throughout this year, a lot of changing parts throughout the whole pandemic, and just keeping up with that. So thank you for being our experts here. We're going to dive into the next question here. It's a question that we've been hearing about droplet contact or airborne contact. So can you please explain to us what's the difference between droplet contact and airborne transmission?
So when you're talking about a respiratory infectious disease, you consider whether or not it's spread by droplets or by aerosols. So droplets are bigger, they're heavier, and they don't travel as far. And they're produced when someone coughs, sneezes, talks, or sings. And they can be spread to somebody who's standing pretty close to you. And the droplet can land in their mouth or their eyes or their nose, or inhaled into their lungs. Droplets can also land on surfaces. So if an infected person coughs on a surface, and then you touch that surface with your hand and then touch your face, your eyes, your mouth, you could get that infection. And surprisingly, the average person touches their face about 20 times an hour, so more often than you would think. Whereas aerosols are smaller, they weigh less, and they hang out in the air for longer periods of time, so they're spread more easily. So diseases like measles are highly transmissible because they're spread by aerosols. Now, the SARS-CoV-2 virus, which is the virus that causes COVID-19, is primarily spread through droplets, which is why things like wearing a mask, physically distancing, and hand washing are very critical.
Okay, perfect. Thank you so much. The next question is from Ulner in Coquitlam, really talking about the mental health aspect of COVID-19 and this year. So his question is, COVID is a big impact, and potentially we're not all feeling the same normal life that we used to have, and that's having some adverse effects on people mentally. So what can you say for those Jamaati members out there that are maybe feeling blue right now? It's been a tough year for them, to help them stay the course and listen to public health mandate.
So I think, first of all, the response from all three of us, I'm sure unanimously, would be you are not alone. People are feeling this everywhere, healthcare workers included, us included, across communities. And so the first message should be that you are not alone. And this is the time in the pandemic where, we often say people are really having to dig deep because people are fatigued. And time sort of makes you feel like you're getting a bit worn down because you've been sort of following measures for a prolonged period of time, really missing the people that you're used to having close connections with. And so now is when you are sort of really having to dig into yourself and sort of have that extra added bit of resilience. but remembering that we need each other. Connection is extremely important and vital. And so we've had to get creative in the ways that we do that. Friday Night Reflections is a wonderful example of that. And our recent Saligra Kushali celebrations is a great example of that. And I think I heard from a lot of people really some sort of almost just not feeling as excited as they typically might around Kushali, feeling like it wouldn't be the same, and then almost pleasantly surprised at the creative ways in which family managed to come together, or friends support each other, or the Jamaat really come together around shared events like the events over the weekend. So first of all, I think the message is to say that you're not alone. Second, it's to say reach out, asking for help or asking for connection, and admitting that you might need something from somebody else often takes a tremendous amount of courage. And it's hard to show vulnerability, but that actually is strength, and we need to be better at doing that. And sometimes it takes leaders around us to share their vulnerabilities for us to feel like we can show ours. And so, myself included, and I'm sure my colleagues would agree, that we've all had moments where we've been feeling particularly down, or feeling like, can I keep doing this? Can I slog through another day of this? Or I really miss my friends. I really miss Jamaat Khana. We're all feeling it. And I would say that now is, a really exciting turning point, that feeling that, the end is not as far away as it was months ago. It's a bit more palpable as we start with vaccines this week, an exciting moment in the country. So if getting access to a virtual visit isn't something that you can do on your own, leverage Jamaati access lines, leverage resources within the community so that we can help you to do that.
Another question from Toronto from Nassim. She says, if someone has tested positive for COVID-19 and is recovering, and they're about 95% good again, do they need to sanitize their apartment so that COVID does not come back? And what other measures do they need to take?
So I think now, and what we had said earlier, really in terms of really following public health guidance, would again remain true, and will continue to remain true through this pandemic. So at this point, we've talked about some folks that if you've had a COVID-19 infection, is there a possibility that you could get an infection again? So there's that, and we know that we can't say with 100% certainty that you may not get the infection again. And so we would advise that even if you've had the infection, you're still going to follow public health measures. You're still going to wear a mask, stay away from crowded spaces, and wash your hands. And again, you're doing that to keep yourself safe as well as to keep those around you safe. And then the other piece of that is in terms of sanitizing your home. So you're doing that again to keep your home free of pathogens. But again, if you're in a shared space, that becomes even that much more important, again, to keep those safe around you. And then finally, I would say, it's really hard with sort of saying, I feel, 95% better, or I think I feel almost back to myself, or 70% better. It's really hard to quantify what that actually is. And so again, we generally say that when it comes to when somebody is at least having to practice isolation, we look at 14 days from the date of symptom onset as being the guidelines. And so I would encourage people to really follow that kind of methodology, as opposed to trying to say, do I feel almost better, or do I still have some symptoms? You really should be really counting those days and monitoring that to be able to follow the guidelines properly.
Wonderful, thank you. Our question is coming from Arissa in Toronto. She's saying, is it more protective to wear 2 masks as opposed to just 1? And I'm going to add on top of that, what is an effective way to wear a mask, and what do you need to look at in your masks?
Great question. So, it seems intuitive that if 1 mask is good, 2 masks would be better. Actually, what Health Canada recommends is a 3-layer mask. So 2 layers of fabric and then a filtering layer between the 2 layers in a single mask. So one way to think about it is you really have 3 masks in one. So what I would encourage people to do is when they're buying their masks, to look for those 3-layer masks and put one of those on. And if you do that and you have a well-fitting mask, and that's important, and that goes to your question, Malika, about how do you put a mask on? What you really want to have is a mask that covers your nose and your mouth and your chin. And so sometimes you'll see people wearing a mask below their nose. That's not what we recommend, because the viral particles can still escape out of the nose. or you can breathe them in through your nose. So you want a mask that covers your nose, your mouth, and your chin. You want it to be 3 layers, and you want it to fit well. You want it to fit well partly so it doesn't bother your ears, and partly so that you're not fiddling with it all the time. You're not feeling like you need to take it off. And a comfortable mask you should be able to wear for many hours at a time, still breathe, still have a conversation. And that's another challenge, that if people are wearing 2 masks, sometimes they're so tight that then they can only wear them for a few minutes. They feel like they're suffocating. And so 1 mask that fits well, and ideally 3 layers.
Thank you. We touched a little bit about this when we were talking about mental health, but the question is out there from Hanif in Ottawa. How has the pandemic affected your motivation to work in healthcare? Now, this question is for everyone on our panel here. So let's start with Dr. Ismail, please.
Oh, that's a good question. Hard to answer because it's affected us in so many different ways. It's affected me as a mother, with my children being home from school and concerns about them going back in person. It's affected me as a daughter because I'm worried about my mom and my mother-in-law. It's affected me as a wife because I'm seeing my husband a lot more. We're spending a lot of time together, and it's been a balance between work and home, and work has been very challenging, where we're not sleeping, we're not eating, we're not seeing our families as much as we'd like. I work in an inner city clinic in Edmonton, where I see marginalized populations who have been tremendously impacted by this pandemic. They've lost their homes, they've lost their jobs, they've lost their families, and many of them are turning to drugs and alcohol to find comfort. So it's tough to balance all of the different roles and try to do your job well in various different settings. And I just feel very lucky that we have our community and our Jamaat and our Imam to guide us, and that I have a wonderful family for support. And I hope that we can draw on our strengths as a community and as a Jamaat to get through this difficult time together.
I would agree, like my colleagues, the impact to us is all personal as well as professional. If I had to answer that question very simply to say, has this pandemic motivated me in such a way to feel that much more passionate about what I do or committed to what I do versus the opposite, I don't think I would hesitate in saying that it's made me more committed to what I do than ever before. Each of us has the privilege of contributing to our society in our own unique ways, and I guess this is mine. But we also, all of us in our community, share in many things, but certainly share in that we've had modeling of this in the concept of seva from the time we were young children. And so when faced with, in wave 1, the recognition that as an emergency room physician, I would be doing high-risk procedures on patients and thinking about my own vulnerability and what that would mean for my family and for my children and my parents and the like, you have those fears, absolutely. There's no doubt about it. But there's something in you that instinctively just says sort of you roll up your sleeves and you dive in because it's what you've learned, it's what you've seen, it's what you've been doing. And that ethic of serving those around you and of the greater good outweighing the individual is just one that our community espouses so strongly that it's just what we've seen, it's what we know. And I'm grateful to be able to leverage that learning and take that into my job.
I think all of us can agree with that, the instilling of the work ethic and the volunteerism in our community. Thank you. And Dr. Dalla, last but not least.
I would definitely agree with Dr. Nimji and Dr. Ismail that the pandemic has affected each of us differently in the Jamaat, in community at large, and even in healthcare. There are definitely some healthcare workers who have suffered a lot. Some who have suffered, paid the ultimate sacrifice actually during the pandemic and lost their lives. The 3 of us, I think, are all very privileged. We're privileged every day, even before the pandemic, to have a good job where we can help people be healthier. And the pandemic has reminded us all, I think, that health is actually the most important resource we have. And so for that, I'm very grateful. We have 3 doctors on this panel, and it's probably, in some ways, it's easier, I think, to stay motivated if you're a physician and you have that position of privilege even within the healthcare system. And I think it's important to recognize, particularly since the pandemic has had such a devastating impact in long-term care homes, that some of our colleagues, healthcare professionals working in long-term care homes, have really suffered immensely during the pandemic. And, really as a country, we haven't done well by those people working in long-term care and the people living in long-term care homes. And I hope that over the months and years to come, we learn from this pandemic, we take better care of the older people in our society and the people who care for them.
Thank you so much, all 3 of you, Dr. Ismail, Dr. Nimji, and Dr. Dalla. Thank you so much for being part of our expert panel. We are so privileged that we have such intelligent people through our community that we can lean on for this advice. So thank you all for being with us today. We really appreciate it.
از پنلیست ها ما بسیار سپاسگزاریم که پاسخ این سوالات را با ما به اشتراک گذاشتند. امیدوارم از آن لذت برده و شاید چیزهایی را شنیده باشید که مثل همیشه در این ایام از آن مطمئن نبودید. ما خوششانس هستیم که می توانیم به سخنان مولانا حاضر امام به عنوان منبع قدرت و جهتگیری در این مبارزه تأمل کنیم. تعلیقه مبارک به مناسبت خوشحالی سالروز مبارک امام، امید و خوشبختی و مرجع برای راهنمایی برای همه ما به ارمغان آورد. در تعلیقه مبارک مولانا حاضر امام فرمودند: نقل قول: من می خواهم که جماعت من با راهنمایی مقامات بهداشتی خود توجه نموده تا از محافظت این واکسین ها بهره مند شوند. ختم نقل قول. و اکنون ما با بخش بعدی خود می رویم و آن هم تأمل بر خط مقدم و جایی که از صداها کسانی را می شنویم و لذت می بریم که به شکل خستگی ناپذیر تلاش کرده اند تا ما را در طی این بیماری همگیر حفظ کنند.
Yalmadad everyone, I am Sawela Ashuri from Montreal. I am currently working at the emergency department of Royal Victoria Hospital Glenside as a nurse clinician. The most difficult part of this COVID pandemic for me is for sure being at the front line, but also having this very disturbing thought of bringing the virus home to my family.
My name is Kareem Ali and I am an infectious disease physician. I am from Niagara, Ontario. A challenging thing that I remember from my time being on the front line for COVID is when one of my colleagues was diagnosed with COVID-19. At that time, hospitals and much of the province, and I think almost all of the country was in lockdown. I remember keeping in touch with my colleague, making sure that the oxygen is good and they are able to breathe properly. I would never forget that call in the middle of the night when they said to me that they are having a difficult time breathing and they don't think they're gonna make it through the night. At that time, we were able to call for help, get them to the hospital and into the intensive care unit. Thankfully, they did okay.
My name is Dr. Alim Nakji. I'm a family doctor and an emergency medicine doctor in Hamilton, Ontario. I work at McMaster University, and I'm also Hamilton Jamaat Khana Mukhi Sahib. The COVID pandemic has been really challenging. We've seen the impact it's had on families. It's made visits difficult. It's torn us apart. On a personal level, we were expecting this little one at the time, so it meant not being able to attend ultrasounds and appointments with my wife. I remember patients coming into the emergency room and speaking about the loneliness and isolation they felt. They described the fact that they hadn't seen any family members in many months, and they talked about the struggles that it took on them.
I have been a nurse for 6 years, and when an emergency would happen on the ward, our first instinct as a healthcare professional is to jump in right away and help the patient. But that has changed. We need to stop and back up and protect ourselves first. We need to apply full protective equipment before entering any patient room, COVID or not COVID. And that's challenging for us because our first instinct is to jump in and help the patient right away.
The most difficult aspect of this pandemic that I can think of is the sheer amount of lonely death that we see when we take care of patients with COVID. Oftentimes, they don't have their loved ones with them to say goodbye or to say a prayer with them. A lot of times, we have held our phones with families over FaceTime to help them say goodbye. Also, one of the most difficult aspects has been the toll it has taken on the families as well as frontline healthcare workers who have been at this since most of this year.
What has inspired me during this crisis is how united we are as one Jamaat. Even though we cannot see each other physically in our Jamaat Khanas, we're still connected. We're still connected through social media, through Friday night reflection, through webinars.
When I'm on the front lines and I'm feeling the burden and I'm thinking about how difficult this year has been for all of us, I'm reminded of the guidance that Hazrat Imam gives us when he talks about the importance of education, not being for ourselves, but for being an opportunity that we have to contribute to others. And that's a source of great strength and a source of great inspiration. That around the world, there are all these healthcare workers that are standing together, using their education for the betterment of the global Jamaat.
An inspiring thing that I remember from this time is how everybody, not just frontline healthcare workers, but also the broader community came together. We followed the rules. We made sure we took care of each other. Everybody is safe. And what has not ceased to amaze me to this day is just the human ingenuity and the scientific progress that we have made, with lots of sacrifices that still continue, but lots of scientific progress that has been made. Last year, this time, we did not even know about this virus. And today, we have a large number of people that are starting to be vaccinated across the world. And inshallah, this is also coming for us here. The next few months for us are going to be extremely difficult. We are already seeing not just the numbers starting to go up, but also the hospitalizations, the deaths that are also starting to go up again. I think these things are a bit different than where we were in March and April. But again, I think it is going to be a difficult winter ahead.
My advice to the Jamaat is, even though we're hearing about vaccines arriving, we still need to continue follow public health guideline, which you all heard about: physical distancing, wearing a mask, and washing your hands regularly to protect ourselves and our loved ones.
There's optimism, there's hope. Hearing Hazrat Imam's words, his feedback that there might be a potential vaccine, that there might be therapeutics that will change the face of the world, it makes me excited. Perhaps we have in front of us a cure. The vaccine presents a real opportunity for life to return to some type of normalcy. It also means that perhaps we don't have to come home with the same fear as providers, worried of what will happen if the virus affects our own families. I'm hopeful, I'm optimistic. Maybe it means a return to normal Jamaat Khanas and normal celebrations so that we can be together once again without masks on, close by, so that we can spend those moments with our family, those moments that really matter to us.
जमात को मेरी एडवाइस कुछ नेक्स्ट कुछ महीनों के लिए ये होगी कि ये महीने हमारे लिए थोड़े मुश्किल होंगे क्योंकि इन्फेक्शन का रेट इंक्रीज़ होता जा रहा है एंड ऑल्सो इसके साथ साथ बहुत से लोग अब हॉस्पिटल और आईसीयू में भी एडमिट हो रहे हैं। इस वक्त बहुत इम्पोर्टेंट है कि हम लोग एक दूसरे से 2 मीटर के फासले पर रहें, स्पेशली उन लोगों के साथ जो कि हमारे घर के अंदर हमारे साथ नहीं रहते। मास्क पहनना और दूसरा हाथों को हैंड सैनिटाइजर से या पानी से अच्छी तरह से साफ रखना।
I know it's been a long, difficult road for all of us. It's been a long year, but we cannot be complacent. Remember the responsibility we have for other members of the Jamaat. You may be young and healthy. You may be older with medical problems, but all of us have to look out for each other. And what's beautiful about this crisis is that we can all play our part. And we must look to our history and see what Ismailis have gone through in the past. We've migrated, we've emigrated, we've hidden, we've struggled, we've fought. And all those examples remind us that when the community comes together, it is the strongest. I would leave the Jamaat with words of encouragement to reflect on the words that Hazrat Imam himself gave us, the message of hope, the message of optimism, and inshallah, a bright future ahead.
شنیدن همه این صداها بسیار قابل توجه بود. از همه کارگران خط مقدم و داوطلبانی که برای حفظ و مراقبت از همه ما بی‌وقفه کار کرده اند تشکر میکنیم و متشکریم. و یک یادآوری برای آنهایی که در مراقبت‌های صحی کار میکنند. پروسه ثبت نام حرفه‌ای مراقبت‌های صحی اسماعیلی به شکل سالانه در حال انجام است. متخصصان مراقبت‌های صحی و همچنین کارکنان مراقبت‌های بهداشتی در همه رشته‌ها را تشویق می‌کنیم تا در این دیتابیس ملی عضو شده و ثبت نام نمایند تا به طور منظم در مورد برنامه‌های منطقه‌ای، ملی و بین المللی و همچنین اطلاعات درباره فرصت‌های داوطلبی آگاهی حاصل نمایند. بیماری همه‌گیر کووید 19 با عنوان یک یادآوری جدی و نیاز همه ما برای گرد هم آمدن و حمایت از یکدیگر است. بنابراین اگر قبلا این کار را نکرده اید لطفاً در iicanada.org ثبت نام کنید. و همانطور که بازتاب جمعه شبها در بسیاری از خانه‌های ما تبدیل به یک رسم و رسوم شده است، نمایش ویژه و به خصوص برنامه مشترک ما در مورد اشتراکات و سنت‌های مشترک ادیان ابراهیمی را در هفته آینده فراموش نکنید. اگر شما مشتاق به گرفتن چای خود هستید، این همان لحظه است که باید آن را انجام دهید. زیرا ما در حال ورود به آن قسمتی هستیم که باید با هم یک جا آن را به تماشا بنشینیم و از موسیقی فوق‌العاده آن لذت ببریم. بنابراین آرام چای خود را بگیرید و سر وقت برگردید. و همچنان یادآوری می کنم اگر قسمت‌های گذشته بازتاب جمعه شب را تماشا کرده نتوانسته اید، اکنون می توانید آن را به راحتی در iicanada.org/fnr پیدا کنید. و اکنون در بخش سرگرمی ها همانطور که نمایش خود را تمام می کنیم مثل همیشه شما را با خود به دنیای موسیقی می بریم. به صورت قطع یکی از قسمت‌های مورد علاقه من در هر هفته و مثل همیشه دیدن استعدادهای خارق العاده در بین جماعت است. امروز از این که میزبان شما بودم برایم بسیار خوشحال کننده و مسرت آمیز بود. امیدوارم از برنامه ما لذت برده باشید. تا هفته آینده، یا علی مدد و الله حافظ.
Some people wonder what's the world coming to. Their days are empty of all the hope that they once knew. We're of the people with faith is so past if we dare to do our part, and we will rise. Some people ask, what difference could I make? One act of kindness cannot undo the world's mistakes. We're of the people with faith.